Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing great wherever you're watching from. It's July 23rd, 2026, and this week the story out of the Gulf isn't just about airstrikes anymore. It's about Iran openly floating the idea of a ground invasion into Kuwait, and CENTCOM answering with another night of strikes deep inside Iranian territory. We're now well into a 2-week-plus air campaign, with CENTCOM confirming its 12th consecutive night of operations against Iran as of July 22nd. So before we get into the hardware and the strategy, let's separate what's actually confirmed from what's just rhetoric, because that distinction matters more this week than almost any other. Here's the headline that's been floating around. Iranian officials, specifically a member of Parliament's National Security Committee, said that if the United States puts boots on Iranian soil, Iran may also launch ground attacks on Kuwait and Bahrain. That's a real quote, reported by outlets covering the region this week. Separately, Iran's foreign minister has accused Washington and Israel of working with Kurdish opposition groups to try to fracture the country from the inside, which, if you're wondering why Iran is suddenly talking this much about Kuwait, is probably connected. When a regime feels like its internal cohesion is the actual battlefield, threatening a neighbor is a pretty classic move to change the subject. But here's the part I want you to actually sit with. Prediction markets and open source trackers watching this conflict are pricing an actual full-scale Iranian invasion of Kuwait by the end of the month at under 3%, single digits. That's not nothing, but it tells you these are still threats, not trupo. Movements. The confirmed, verifiable event on the ground is different and honestly more revealing. Back in May, Kuwaiti security forces intercepted an infiltration attempt near Bubiyan Island, a sensitive port zone close to the Iraqi border, and captured 4 individuals linked to the IRGC after a firefight that wounded a Kuwaiti soldier. That's a real documented incident. A parliamentary member saying, "We may launch ground attacks" is rhetoric. 4 operatives getting captured trying to sneak across a border is a fact. I want you to notice the difference every single time you see this story covered, because a lot of channels are going to blur that line for views. We're not doing that here. So why Kuwait specifically? Geography. Iran shares no land border with Kuwait. Any real overland option has to route through southern Iraq, and that's exactly the kind of movement that U.S. and allied intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets would be, positioned to catch well before it turned into an actual border crossing. Kuwait also happens to host a serious concentration of American personnel and hardware, which is precisely why it's been targeted repeatedly by missiles and drones throughout this campaign. Not invaded, targeted. Kuwait's own armed forces have confirmed intercepting waves of these attacks, describing engagements against ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones aimed at military and civilian infrastructure, with some debris causing damage on the ground. So the real Kuwait story right now isn't tanks rolling across a border. It's air defense crews working overtime night after night, and a regime in Tehran that appears to want the world to think a ground option is on the table, whether or not it actually is. Now here's where it gets personal for this conflict. An Iranian army spokesperson, Brigadier General Mohammad Akhraminiya, said on Iranian state television this week that if the U.S. tries to occupy Iranian territory, Iran will bomb its own land rather than allow it to be taken. This is the logic of war, he said. Read that again. That's not a threat aimed outward. That's a regime telling its own population, on state TV, that it will destroy its own infrastructure and put its own people in the blast radius before it lets go of power. That's not strength. That's a government that has decided the survival of the leadership matters more than the survival of the country it claims to represent. Keep that in your back pocket, because it's going to matter later in the strategic breakdown. Let's talk about what CENTCOM has actually been doing, because this is where the footage gets real instead of speculative. CENTCOM's own public statements confirm strikes targeting Iranian military command centers, naval capabilities, aircraft hangars, drone storage facilities, and logistics infrastructure, all explicitly framed around one stated goal: degrading Iran's ability to keep attacking commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM has also stated that over the past several months, Iran has struck more than 30 commercial vessels transiting that waterway, endangering the lives of sailors who have nothing to do with this fight and choking a corridor that a huge share of the world's oil moves through. That's the official framing, straight from CENTCOM's own releases, and it's worth repeating because it's easy to lose the why in all the footage of explosions. Separately, and this is a claim you should hold with real caution, Iran's Revolutionary Guard-linked media claimed to have struck a drone base along with early warning radar and communications infrastructure at Ali al-Salem Air Base in Kuwait. I want to be straight with you. That's an IRGC-aligned claim, not something CENTCOM has independently confirmed at time of filming. In this war, we've already seen a pattern where Iranian state media claims casualties or damage that CENTCOM later directly denies, Just recently, CENTCOM publicly pushed back on an IRGC-aligned outlet's claim that American officers were killed in a Kuwait base attack, stating plainly that all personnel were accounted for. So when you see wild claims out of Tehran's press machine, the healthy move is to wait for CENTCOM, Kuwait's own military, or independent reporting to confirm it before you treat it as real. That's not me being soft on the story. That's me trying to keep this channel accurate so we're not the outlet that gets caught repeating Iranian information warfare as if it were fact. Now let's get into the actual hardware, because this is the part of the show where we talk about what's really doing the work up there. CENTCOM has not published a detailed platform-by-platform breakdown of every asset in the air on any given night, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise or hand you a fake order of battle. What we do know, based on confirmed statements and video, CENTCOM itself has released, is that this campaign has involved a mix of fighter aircraft, naval strike assets, and drones operating together against a target set that's evolved over the 2+ weeks of the campaign, starting with coastal radar and fast attack boats in the early nights, and expanding over time to include command and control nodes, missile and drone storage, and logistics arteries connecting Iran's southern coast to the interior. Here's the concept that actually matters if you want to understand why this campaign has been effective rather than just loud. Modern strike packages aren't about one plane doing everything. They're layered. Electronic warfare aircraft go in first to jam or take down enemy radar, so the strike aircraft behind them are in effect flying into a blind battlefield from Iran's perspective. Once that picture goes dark for Iranian air defense operators, precision strike aircraft can move in against high-value, time-sensitive targets, command posts, storage sites, mobile launchers, with a level of accuracy that just wasn't possible a generation ago. And increasingly, that manned strike aircraft doesn't have to do the riskiest part of the job alone. There's a real and rapidly maturing category of autonomous or semi-autonomous combat drones. Companies like Shield AI and Anduril have both fielded systems explicitly designed to operate in contested, GPS-denied environments exactly like the one Iran has been trying to create with jamming and decoys. The idea is straightforward. Let the drone go first into the most contested airspace, gather targeting data, or even take the first shot, while the human aircrew stays further back at a safer standoff distance. Whether any specific one of those systems is flying missions over Iran right now is not something I can confirm to you, and anybody telling you definitively which drone is in theater without an official source is guessing. What I can tell you is that this is the direction the technology and the doctrine are both heading, and the Gulf right now is about as real-world a test of that concept as modern warfare has produced. The other piece of this that doesn't get enough attention is the naval side. CENTCOM has maintained a blockade posture around Iranian oil export points throughout this campaign, and there have been confirmed incidents of tankers attempting to defy that blockade being directly engaged. That's a different kind of pressure than airstrikes. It's economic. Every tanker that can't move oil has lost revenue for a regime that's already bleeding money into this fight. Combine that with strikes on logistics corridors connecting Iran's southern ports to the interior, and you start to see the actual strategy underneath the footage. This isn't just about blowing things up for the sake of it. It's about cutting off the ability of the IRGC to resupply, refinance, and reposition, one strike package at a time. Let's be honest about the other side of this, though, because a real analysis has to be. Iran is not finished. Iranian officials have stated publicly, repeatedly, that a significant part of their military capability has not yet been used. And while regimes under pressure always say that, it would be a mistake to assume it's pure bluff. Iran has demonstrated on multiple nights that it can still generate coordinated missile and drone attacks against several countries simultaneously. Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan have all reported intercepting incoming fire in the same short windows of time. That takes some level of functioning command and control, even under 2 weeks of strikes aimed at degrading exactly that. So the honest picture is this. Iran's capability is degraded, its economy is strangled, its diplomatic options are narrowing, but it is not defenseless. And every night this continues carries real risk to service members and civilians on both sides. 16 American service members have died in this conflict as of the most recent reporting. And that's not a number to breeze past for the sake of a dramatic transition into the next section. Real people, real families, real loss. All right, let's move into the global roundup section, because there's a lot happening around the world that connects to this story, even if it's not making the front page. Ukraine has continued its long-range drone campaign against Russian logistics, targeting supply and production nodes tied to Russia's own drone manufacturing. A reminder that this Gulf conflict is happening alongside, not instead of, the war in Ukraine, and that both conflicts are pulling on the same global pool of munitions, components, and diplomatic attention. Separately, there's ongoing reporting and dispute over Chinese firms, with links to Beijing's military allegedly providing satellite and geospatial data that's been used to help Iran target shipping and military positions in the Gulf. China has denied direct involvement, but the pattern of accusations has been consistent enough across multiple reporting cycles that it's worth watching rather than dismissing outright. And closer to home, air travel security has been on edge, with reports of heightened alerts at U.S. airports tied to concerns about man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, shoulder-fired missiles that remain one of the top concerns for aviation security specialists, specifically because commercial aircraft are most vulnerable during the takeoff and landing phases of flight when they're low, slow, and can't maneuver aggressively. Any specific alert like that deserves to be treated seriously by authorities and reported factually, rather than sensationalized, so I'm not going to pretend to know more about any single incident than what's been officially confirmed. Now let's get to the strategic analysis, because this is the section where we try to connect the dots instead of just reading you a list of explosions. Here's what I think is actually going on with Iran's Kuwait rhetoric. A regime that is confident in its military position does not need to threaten invasions of neighbors it shares no border with. It projects strength through capability, not through statements. What we're watching instead looks like a government trying to manufacture leverage it no longer has on the battlefield. Every night that CENTCOM degrades another layer of command infrastructure, missile storage, or logistics capacity is a night where Iran's actual options narrow. So the rhetoric gets louder specifically because the capability gets smaller. That's not a contradiction. That's usually exactly how it works. And remember that quote from earlier, the Iranian general saying Iran would bomb its own territory rather than let it be occupied. That's not a government making a calculated military threat. That's a government revealing out loud that it sees its own infrastructure and its own people as expendable in service of protecting the leadership's grip on power. That's the through line connecting the Kuwait threats, the internal crackdowns we've documented in past videos, and the willingness to keep escalating even as the economic and military costs mount. When a regime is willing to destroy what it has rather than lose control of it, that tells you something important about how far it's actually willing to go. And it should inform how skeptical we all stay of any of its claims going forward, including the claims about Kuwait. Where does this go from here? I think the honest answer is that nobody fully knows, including probably people inside the Pentagon and inside Tehran. What we can watch for, concretely, are the same signals that have mattered every week of this conflict. Does the ceasefire diplomacy that's been floated through intermediaries like Qatar, Egypt, or Oman actually gain traction? Or does it collapse the way prior attempts have when hardliners on either side keep operating outside the framework? Does Iran attempt any kind of overland movement toward the Iraq-Kuwait border that ISR assets can actually detect, which would be the real signal that the invasion talk has moved from rhetoric to planning? And does CENTCOM's target set keep expanding toward the kind of deep, hardened infrastructure that would suggest this campaign is trying to force a decisive outcome rather than just a war of attrition?